Before we begin, welcome to the channel where ordinary family moments turn into unforgettable life lessons. If you believe small decisions can change entire destinies, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stay with us, because today's story might hit closer to home than you expect. He always said the garage smelled like old metal and wasted time. To Daniel, it was just a cramped space packed with rusty tools, dented boxers, and shelves sagging under the weight of things no one used anymore. To his father, it was a lifetime. Every wrench had a story. Every scratch on the wooden workbench meant something. But Daniel didn't see stories. He saw clutter. He saw money sitting there, unused, while his own life felt stuck. His father, Harold Bennett, had spent 40 years working as a mechanic. Not in a shiny dealership with polished floors and free coffee. He worked in a small repair shop at the edge of town, where the sign flickered in winter and the heater barely worked. He fixed engines that others said weren't worth saving. He repaired cars for people who couldn't afford replacements, and he brought home hands that smelled of oil and sweat every single night. Daniel had grown up watching those hands. As a child, he would sit on a red toolbox while his father worked, swinging his legs and asking questions. Harold would pause, wipe his hands on a rag, and explain everything patiently: how a carburetor breathed, how a piston moved, how careful work could bring something broken back to life. Daniel used to look at him like he was a magician. But somewhere along the way, admiration turned into resentment. Daniel didn't want grease under his nails. He didn't want to spend his life bent over engines. He wanted something faster, bigger, easier. He wanted success that looked impressive online. He wanted money now. When Harold retired at 65, he didn't throw a party. The shop closed quietly. The owner shook his hand. A few loyal customers stopped by to say thank you. Harold carried his personal tools home in cardboard boxes and lined them up carefully in the garage. "This is my real pension," he had joked. Daniel didn't laugh. He was 24, unemployed, and drowning in small debts that felt huge. Credit card payments, a car loan, a few bad investments in online schemes that promised easy returns. Every day he scrolled through social media and saw people his age flashing new phones, new apartments, new lives. He felt behind. One evening, he walked into the garage while his father was organizing his tools. Harold looked up with that same patient smile. "Want to learn how to rebuild a starter motor?" he asked. Daniel sighed. "No, Dad, I don't want to rebuild old junk." Harold's smile faded, but only slightly. "It's not junk. These tools built our house, paid for your school, kept food on the table." Daniel didn't respond. He just looked around. He noticed brand names etched into metal. Heavy-duty equipment. Vintage tools collectors might pay good money for. He didn't know much about mechanics, but he knew about online marketplaces. He saw numbers. Over the next week, Daniel did research. He took photos when his father wasn't home. He searched listings late at night. Antique torque wrenches, limited edition, socket sets, industrial jacks. The total value surprised him. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to wipe out his debts and give him what he called a fresh start. He told himself something important. Dad doesn't use them anymore. He repeated it until it felt true. The day he made the decision, Harold was visiting an old coworker in the hospital. Daniel stood alone in the garage, staring at the rows of tools, hanging like silent witnesses. His hands trembled, but he told himself it was just nerves. He started packing. The first box felt heavy. Not just physically. He paused for a second when he picked up the old ratchet set. He remembered being 8 years old, holding that exact piece while his father guided his small hands. "Turn slowly," Harold had said. "Respect the machine." Daniel shook the memory away. He loaded everything into his car. He drove to a pawn shop across town, where no one knew his family. The owner inspected the items carefully, impressed by their condition. "You sure you want to sell all this?" the man asked. "Yeah," Daniel replied quickly. "Need the cash." The offer was lower than market value, but it was immediate. Immediate felt good. Immediate felt powerful. He signed the papers. The cash in his hand felt like relief. On the drive home, he imagined freedom. No more collection calls. No more anxiety when opening his banking app. Maybe he'd invest smarter this time. Maybe this was the turning point. When he pulled into the driveway, the garage looked emptier than he expected. Harold returned that evening. He walked straight to the garage, as he always did, before even taking off his shoes. Daniel heard the door open, then silence. A long, unnatural silence. Daniel. The way his father said his name made his stomach tighten. He walked slowly to the garage. Harold was standing in the center of the empty space. The pegboard walls were bare. The workbench was cleared. Only dust outlines remained where tools once hung. "Where are my tools?" Harold asked softly. Daniel forced himself to meet his father's eyes. "I sold them." The words hung in the air like smoke. "You what?" "I sold them. We needed money. You don't even use them anymore." Harold blinked several times, as if trying to process a language he didn't understand. "You sold them," he repeated. "It's not a big deal, Dad. They were just sitting here. Just sitting here." Harold slowly walked to the workbench and ran his hand over the empty wood. His fingers traced the faded marks left by decades of labor. "They weren't just sitting," he said quietly. "They were waiting." "For what?" "For the day you might want to build something." Daniel felt irritation rising. "I'm not you. I'm not going to be a mechanic. I never asked you to be." Silence again. But this time it was heavier. "How much did you get?" Harold asked. Daniel told him. Harold nodded slowly. That set alone was worth twice that. Daniel's chest tightened. "It doesn't matter. I needed the money now." Harold looked at him, and for the first time in Daniel's life, there was no patience in his father's eyes. Only hurt. "You needed money," Harold said. "So you sold the hands that raised you." Daniel flinched. "That's dramatic." "No," Harold replied. "It's accurate." That night, they ate dinner in silence. The house felt different. Smaller, colder. Daniel expected anger, yelling, accusations. But Harold didn't shout. He simply stopped talking about the future. He stopped inviting Daniel into the garage. He stopped sharing stories. A week later, something broke in the kitchen sink. The pipe under the counter burst, spraying water everywhere. Daniel panicked. "Dad?" he shouted. Harold walked in calmly, assessed the situation, and then paused. "My tools," he said quietly. They both stood there, water pooling at their feet. Daniel scrambled to find a wrench in a cheap toolbox he had, bought from a discount store after selling the originals. The metal bent under pressure. The grip slipped. Harold watched without speaking. After several frustrating minutes, Daniel stepped back, defeated. "I can't fix it." Harold grabbed an old adjustable wrench he had kept in his truck, one he hadn't included in the garage collection. He tightened the pipe carefully, efficiently, stopping the leak in seconds. Daniel felt small. Over the next month, small things kept breaking. The lawnmower, the car battery, a loose door hinge. Each time, Daniel realized how much knowledge had lived in that garage. How much skill. How much quiet competence. One afternoon, he overheard his father on the phone. "No, I'm not selling anything else," Harold said. "It's all gone." His voice sounded older. Daniel began to understand something uncomfortable. The tools weren't just objects. They were proof of a life spent being useful, being capable, being needed. Without them, Harold seemed lighter. Not in a good way. Emptier. One evening Daniel found his father sitting at the kitchen table, looking at an old photo. It showed a younger Harold standing proudly beside the garage, Daniel as a little boy on his shoulders. "You remember this?" Harold asked. Daniel nodded. "You used to say you wanted to fix cars with me forever." Daniel swallowed. "I was a kid." Harold smiled faintly. "Yes, you were." The guilt began to grow. Daniel checked online listings. The pawnshop had already resold most of the items, He tried calling, but the owner simply shrugged. Business is business. Daniel started calculating what it would cost to buy back even half of what he had sold. The number was overwhelming. More than he had received. More than he had left. The quick cash was gone. Used to pay debts, to cover expenses, to buy things that already felt meaningless. But the loss remained. One morning, Harold didn't come down for breakfast. Daniel found him in the garage, sitting on a folding chair in the empty space. "I keep reaching for things that aren't there," Harold said without looking up. Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Harold nodded slowly. "I know you are. But forgiveness doesn't refill empty walls." Daniel decided to change something. He applied for a job at a local hardware store. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't look impressive online. But it was honest work. He spent his days learning about tools, materials, and repairs. He asked older coworkers questions. He listened at every paycheck. He set aside a portion. Weeks turned into months. One Saturday, he drove across 3 towns to buy back a vintage torque wrench he recognized from his father's collection. It cost him nearly half his savings. But when he held it in his hands, he felt something shift. He brought it home and placed it quietly on the workbench. Harold walked into the garage later that evening and stopped. He picked up the wrench, turning it over in his hands. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "I bought it," Daniel replied. "I'm trying to bring them back." Harold looked at him for a long moment. "It won't be the same, I know, but it's a start." Daniel nodded. Over the next year, the garage slowly began to fill again. Not with everything that was lost. Some pieces were gone forever, but enough returned to rebuild something more important than inventory. Their conversations came back gradually too. Not forced. Not dramatic. Just small exchanges over tightening bolts and organizing shelves. One evening, Daniel asked, "Why didn't you yell at me?" Harold considered the question. "Because I wanted you to understand, not just regret." Daniel looked at his hands, less soft now. "A little rough from work. I understand," he said. Harold nodded. The money Daniel once thought would save him had disappeared in weeks. But the lesson lasted years. He learned that quick cash often costs more than it gives. That some things hold value beyond price tags. That respect isn't about agreement, it's about recognition. Years later, when Harold passed away peacefully in his sleep, the garage was no longer empty. Daniel stood inside it after the funeral, running his fingers over the tools they had rebuilt together. He realized something profound. He hadn't just bought back metal and wood, he had bought back connection. And this time, he understood exactly what it was worth. The first winter after his father passed away was the hardest. The house felt too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that echoes. The kind that makes you hear memories in the walls. Daniel found himself walking into the garage every evening, flipping on the same overhead light Harold used to switch on without thinking. The hum of that light became a ritual. He would stand in the center of the space, surrounded by the tools they had rebuilt together, and feel both pride and regret wrapped tightly around his chest. Some hooks on the pegboard were still empty. He never filled them. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to pretend nothing had happened. Loss leaves space, and sometimes that space should stay visible. Daniel kept working at the hardware store long after he no longer needed to. What started as a way to repay a mistake slowly became something else. He found satisfaction in helping customers fix problems. A young couple trying to repair their first home. An elderly woman struggling with a stuck window latch. A teenager building a skateboard ramp in his backyard. Every time someone said, "I don't know how to fix this," Daniel heard his father's voice in his head. Turn slowly. Respect the machine. He began staying late after shifts, reorganizing shelves, learning about new tools, asking suppliers questions about quality. He stopped chasing shortcuts. He stopped believing in fast money. One afternoon, a young man about 22 walked into the store, looking anxious. He carried a cracked lawnmower carburetor in his hands. "Do you guys buy old parts?" the young man asked. Daniel looked at him carefully. There was something familiar in his impatience, in his restless energy. "Why?" Daniel asked gently. "I just need quick cash. It's junk anyway." Junk. The word landed hard. Daniel stepped out from behind the counter and examined the part. It wasn't junk. It just needed cleaning and a small replacement piece. "I won't buy it," Daniel said. The young man frowned. "Why not?" "Because it's worth more fixed than sold." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "I don't have time to fix it." Daniel smiled slightly. "That's what everyone says right before they regret selling something." The young man hesitated. Daniel didn't lecture him. He didn't tell him a dramatic story. He simply said, "If you want, I'll show you how to repair it. No charge." They spent an hour at the workbench in the back of the store. Daniel guided him patiently, the same way Harold once guided him. Slow turns, careful adjustments, respect for the machine. When the engine sputtered back to life, the young man's face lit up. "You could sell it for 3 times what you would have gotten for parts," Daniel said. The young man nodded, gratitude softening his earlier desperation. As he left, Daniel felt something close to peace. That evening, Daniel sat in the garage at home and spoke aloud, even though no one was there. "I get it now." The tools on the wall gleamed under the light. Not new, not perfect, but honest. Months later, the owner of the hardware store announced he was retiring. He planned to sell the business. Daniel's first instinct was fear. Change always made him uneasy. But then he looked around at the aisles he had helped organize, the customers who greeted him by name, the repair workshops he had started hosting on Saturdays. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel behind. He felt ready. The asking price for the store was high. Too high for someone who once sold his father's life's work for quick cash. But Daniel had been saving. Quietly, consistently. No risky investments. No shortcuts. He went to the bank. He showed them years of steady income, disciplined spending, and community involvement. The loan officer studied his records. "You've been patient," she said. Daniel smiled. "I've learned patience the hard way." 3 months later, Daniel Bennett became the new owner of Bennett Hardware. He kept the name. He added a small sign below it, built on respect. On opening day under his ownership, he invited neighbors, old customers, and former coworkers. He placed one of his father's restored wrenches in a glass case near the register. Not as decoration. As a reminder. During his short speech, his hands trembled slightly. "My father spent his life fixing things," Daniel said. "I once thought success meant moving faster than the people who came before you. I was wrong. Success means understanding the value of what they built." The crowd applauded politely, unaware of the full weight behind those words. Years passed. Daniel married, had a daughter. He named her Lily. When she was old enough to walk steadily, he brought her into the garage one afternoon. She sat on a small red stool while he worked on repairing a neighbor's generator. She watched him carefully. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to a torque wrench. Daniel paused. He picked it up gently. "This," he said, "is something your grandpa loved." "Why?" "Because it helped him fix things properly." Lily reached for it. "Can I try?" Daniel smiled. He guided her tiny hands the same way Harold once guided his. Slow turns, careful movements, respect. In that moment, he felt a circle closing. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel found an old envelope tucked into a drawer in the garage. He didn't recognize it at first. Then he realized what it was. The receipt from the pawn shop. He stared at the amount written in faded ink. It looked so small now, so insignificant compared to what it had cost. He didn't feel the sharp guilt he once did. Instead, he felt gratitude for the lesson it forced him to learn. Without that mistake, he might have continued chasing illusions forever. The next day, he framed the receipt and hung it quietly on the inside wall of a cabinet in the garage. Not visible to visitors, only to him. A reminder that desperation makes you blind. That impatience sells what patience would protect. Years later, when Lily was a teenager, she came home one afternoon upset. "I sold something today," she said. Daniel's heart skipped. "What was it?" he asked carefully. "My old art tablet. I needed money for concert tickets. But now I feel weird about it." Daniel didn't react with panic. He simply listened. "I thought I didn't use it anymore," she continued. "But now I miss it." Daniel nodded slowly. "Sometimes we only understand value after it's gone. Did you ever do something like that?" she asked. He considered the question. He had never told her the full story. "Yes," he said finally. "I once sold something that mattered very much." "What happened?" "It took me years to fix the damage." She studied his face. "Did you fix it?" "Not completely," he admitted, "but enough." Lily thought for a moment. "Do you think I should buy it back?" Daniel smiled softly. "Only if you're ready to value it properly this time." A week later, Lily saved her own money and repurchased the tablet from the friend who bought it. She treated it differently afterward. Not carelessly, not casually. Daniel watched quietly, pride swelling in his chest. Time continued its steady march. The garage aged with him. The workbench gained new scratches. The pegboard filled and shifted. Tools came and went, but never carelessly again. On the 10th anniversary of his father's passing, Daniel hosted a free community repair day at the store. People brought broken lamps, squeaky doors, faulty fans. He and his staff worked side by side with them, teaching instead of just fixing. An elderly man approached him near closing time. "You remind me of someone," the man said. "Who?" Daniel asked. "A mechanic who used to work at the old shop by the highway. Fixed my truck when no one else could." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "That was my father," he said quietly. The man smiled. "He was a good man. Never rushed the job." Daniel nodded. "I know." That night, standing alone in the garage once more, Daniel looked at the tools hanging in neat rows. He no longer saw metal. He saw time, sacrifice, quiet love expressed through work. He understood now that the real inheritance wasn't the equipment. It was the mindset. Respect what you build. Protect what sustains you. Don't trade permanence for speed. The mistake of selling his father's tools had once defined him in his own mind. Now, it had shaped him instead. He had learned that quick cash disappears, but consequences stay. He had learned that pride in honest work outlasts any online illusion of success. He had learned that some things are not valuable because of what they cost, but because of what they represent. And most importantly, he learned that redemption isn't about reversing the past. It's about building better because of it. As the garage light hummed softly above him, Daniel turned it off and closed the door gently. This time, nothing inside felt empty.